Novel Navigator. Chapter 61, Going Through the Dragon Gate. Gold Dragon Ambassador, what do you think about this little guy? Huoman asked. His comprehension of the sword principle of Gale is good. Yerifeng smiled slightly and looked at Jian Wushuang, then continued, Little guy, how old are you? 17, Jian Wushuang replied. Only 17. Yerifeng and Huoman both had a surprised expression, then Yerifeng laughed and said, You are excellent considering your high comprehension of the sword principle of Gale. Little guy, you should prepare yourself to go to the Dragon Palace with me in 2 days. Jian Wushuang's eyes lit up because he understood that Yerifeng recognized his talent and was going to recommend him. Thank you so much, Gold Dragon Ambassador, Jian Wushuang said immediately. You are welcome. It will also benefit me if you really become a disciple of Dragon Palace. Yerifeng gave a wave. Jian Wushuang nodded and then he left. Qingdong City, Celestial Immortal Residence. Brother Swordsman. Swordsman, how did it go? Yinmin and Ling Tianhao had been waiting for him since earlier. The Gold Dragon Ambassador promised to recommend me. But it's not guaranteed that I can join Dragon Palace, Jian Wushuang said. Haha, based on your strength, you should definitely be able to. Come on. Cheers, Ling Tianhao said and smiled. Jian Wushuang grabbed the wine cup and had a toast with Ling Tianhao. Although the time that he had been acquainted with Yinmin and Ling Tianhao was not long, he found that they were a spontaneous and merited group after getting along with them. The status of a Gold Dragon Ambassador is high and he knows a lot regarding Dragon Palace. Also, a Gold Dragon Ambassador has a limited number of recommendations, so each recommendation is important. Since the Gold Dragon Ambassador recommended you, it means that he thinks you have the ability to make it through the test to join Dragon Palace, Yinmin said. Jian Wushuang nodded secretly. Indeed, Yerifeng was well informed on the situation inside the Dragon Palace. Since he was willing to recommend him, it meant that he was confident in Jian Wushuang. Haha, based on that, you will definitely be able to join and cultivate in the Dragon Palace. Come on. Cheers. Cheers. Congratulations. Ling Tianhao said instantly. Jian Wushuang and Yinmin also lift their cups. The three of them were drinking with passion. 2 days later, at the Golden Dragon subsidiary palace. Little guy, are you ready? Let's go, Yerifeng said. Jian Wushuang nodded and then he left the city with Yerifeng. Now, they were outside of the city. Grasp my hand, Yerifeng said. After grasping Yerifeng's hand without hesitance, Jian Wushuang felt a special power gathering beneath Yerifeng's feet. Subsequently, the figure of Yerifeng was floating and then Jian Wushuang also began floating. Then, they left at an incredible speed. Is this void walk? Jian Wushuang was surprised and became even more eager to reach the Yin-Yang Void Realm. The distance between the Dragon Palace and Qingdong City was equal to the most remote provinces. It would take 1 or 2 months to rush to the Dragon Palace if Jian Wushuang walked there on his own. But now it would only take 1 day to rush to the Dragon Palace under Yerifeng's lead. Is this the Dragon Palace? Jian Wushuang was still floating in the air, overlooking the boundless ground in astonishment. Below him, he saw an area between 2 giant mountains, full of magnificent palaces and pavilions that towered above the ground. In the center, a statue of a gold dragon was coiled up, appearing as if it was flying to the 9th heaven. Let's go down. Yerifeng dived down along with Jian Wushuang. Upon reaching the ground, many figures appeared in front of them. These people all wore the same golden armors and helmets, holding golden long spears. When they saw Yerifeng, they paid their respects instantly and said, Your Excellency. Where are the 2 palace masters? Yerifeng asked directly. They are both staying at the Dragon Gate, a golden armored sergeant, a leader among them, said. Oh. The Dragon Gate? Is there an exceptional genius going through the Dragon Gate Pass? He should be fascinating if he drew the attention of the two palace masters, replied Yirifeng. Yes. He is new, but his talent is unbelievable. It's said that he has made it through the 6th layer, said the golden armored sergeant. What? The 6th layer? Yirifeng was shocked and then waved his hand, saying, carry on with your duties. I'll go meet the two palace masters on my own. Okay. Those golden armored sergeants went back to work immediately. However, they could not help glancing at Jian Wushuang as they left. Jian Wushuang's expression was serious. Once those golden armored sergeants were gone, he could not help asking, Your Excellency, those sergeants are all experts in the gold core realm. Yes. And their strength is at the peak of the gold core realm. Yirifeng smiled casually and continued saying, those golden armored sergeants are the emperor guarding army that is well known in the Tianzong dynasty. They specifically guard the imperial palace and some other important areas. They are the most elite and violent force in the Tianzong dynasty. The battle strength of the army is astonishing. The minimum strength required to become a sergeant in the emperor guarding army, the peak of the golden core realm. What? Jian Wushuang was astonished. The minimum strength required for normal sergeants was the peak of the gold core realm? Little guy, I have heard from Huo Man that you have a great enmity with the Blood Feather Tower, and that it's irreconcilable. Is that right? Yirifeng asked while looking at Jian Wushuang. Yes, Jian Wushuang said and nodded. Don't worry about the Blood Feather Tower. As long as you can make it through the Dragon Palace's test and become a disciple of Dragon Palace, you will be protected. The Dragon Palace is located at the campsite of the Emperor Guarding Army. There are many experts. The Blood Feather Tower has no way to kill you in the Dragon Palace, even if they sent all of their experts here, said Yirifeng. Jian Wushuang believed him. Your Excellency. Is the Dragon Gate that the sergeant mentioned also the testing area for joining the Dragon Palace? Jian Wushuang asked. You are clever. Yes, a carp jumping into the Dragon Gate means that you are successful. Every disciple who joins and cultivates in the Dragon Palace has to make it through the Dragon Gate Pass. That is the test you must pass, Yirifeng narrated. The test in the Dragon Gate is special. It doesn't test your cultivation, spiritual power, or your martial arts technique. It tests your comprehension of the essence realm of heaven and earth. The Dragon Gate has total 13 layers. The first layer requires comprehension of the essence realm of heaven and earth. The higher your comprehension, the more layers you go through. Under normal circumstances, the minimum for joining the Dragon Palace is to make it through the third layer. Because your swordsmanship was executed using your comprehension of the sword principle of Gale, I think that you are very likely to make it through the third layer. That is why I recommended you, Yirifeng said. Based on my comprehension of the sword principle of Gale, it is very likely that I can make it through the third layer. Jian Wushuang's expression became strange. From what the golden armored sergeant said earlier, a new person, like him, that just arrived, was currently going through the Dragon Gate and had already passed through the 6th layer. Chapter 62, Peerless Genius Yang Zexuan. Okay. This is the Dragon Gate. Yirifeng led Jian Wushuang to a towering golden pavilion. At a glance, the pavilion appeared to have 13 levels. At the moment, many people were standing in front of the golden pavilion. The two most prominent people were an old man wearing a black robe and a graceful woman dressed in white. Even though Yirifeng was an expert, upon seeing these two people he bowed to pay his respects and said, Greetings, Palace Master Black and Palace Master White. Yirifeng. The graceful woman in white looked at him and Jian Wushuang, then said with a smile, You brought this little guy to go through the Dragon Gate. Yes, said Yirifeng with a nod. You will have to wait a minute. Someone else is already going through the Dragon Gate now, said the graceful woman in white, then she turned her head immediately. Yirifeng and Jian Wushuang had no choice but to wait quietly. Jian Wushuang lifted his head and looked at the towering golden pavilion. The lowest 6 levels of this 13-level golden pavilion were shining. Jian Wushuang knew it meant that 6 levels had been passed by the genius that was currently going through the Dragon Gate. Currently, the genius was making his way through the 7th level. Suddenly, the 7th level of the golden pavilion also burst out with a golden light. He passed the 7th level. Yirufeng shouted out in shock. Many others outside of the golden pavilion also shouted out in surprise. Sir Ye, is it amazing that he passed the 7th level? Jian Wushuang couldn't help asking. Amazing. It is really amazing. Yirufeng nodded seriously and said, I have told you that moving through the Dragon Gate is based on your comprehension of the essence realm of heaven and earth. It's likely that you could make it through the 3rd level with your comprehension of the sword principle of Gale. But it's hard to say if you could make it through the 4th level. As for the 7th level, it's a huge bottleneck. Generally speaking, only someone with comprehension equal to an expert in the yin-yang void realm can make it through. In other words, if someone gets through the 7th level, it means that his comprehension of the essence realm of heaven and earth is not less than an expert in the yin-yang void realm. Jian Wushuang was shocked. How strong was an expert in the yin-yang void realm? How high was an expert's comprehension of the essence realm of heaven and earth? Jian Wushuang could not imagine it. However, he knew that the amount of time he spent comprehending the essence realm of heaven and earth was short. Although he reached a certain level of understanding, there were numerous people whose comprehension was higher than his just among experts in the gold core realm. As for the yin-yang void realm, he was too far away from them. If going through the 7th level is amazing, how about the 8th level? Jian Wushuang asked. Suddenly, the 8th level of the golden pavilion immediately burst out with golden light. He passed through the 8th level. The 8th level. Yirufeng had a shocked expression. No wonder the 2 palace maters of Dragon Palace came, a marvelous new member has appeared. Even before cultivating in Dragon Palace, he can already pass through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate. There's no doubt that he'll make greater progress after cultivating in Dragon Palace. His achievements will be even more spectacular. He is really a peerless genius. Yirufeng was full of praise, but Jian Wushuang only gave a shrug after listening to his explanation. He was just good in the eyes of Yirufeng, but the genius going through the Dragon Gate was praised by Yirufeng. With this, it's easy to see how amazingly talented he was. Going through the 8th level of Dragon Gate represented that his comprehension of the essence realm of heaven and earth had surpassed many experts of the yin-yang void realm. It also induced a burst of surprise outside of the golden pavilion. However, the 8th was the limit. The 9th level of the golden pavilion did not light up in the end. Jingle. The gate of the golden pavilion opened. Wearing a blood-red robe, with a blood-red saber on his back, a young man slowly appeared before the eyes of the crowd. Everyone looked at the young man for the first time, including Jian Wushuang. He was slender and handsome with a hint of indifference and pride on his face, a glimmer of an unyielding will was hidden in the deep of his eyes, and he emanated an aura of coldness. The man is cold. Jian Wushuang frowned secretly. Ha, little guy. Welcome to Dragon Palace. The Black and White Palace Masters, as well as the nearby experts of the Dragon Palace, all greeted him with a smile. Little guy, what's your name and how old are you? Palace Master White asked with good intentions. Yang Zixuan, 21, he replied in a cold voice. Everyone who heard him was immediately surprised. 21. He is only 21 years old, yet his comprehension of the essence realm of heaven and earth is already so high. He managed to pass through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate. The most dazzling talent in Dragon Palace only made it through the 8th level. Awesome. Our Dragon Palace will become boisterous. Bai Cheng finally has a rival. Many disciples of Dragon Palace that were present were talking about that. A 21-year-old man had gone through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate. Even in Dragon Palace, it was incredible. He was the most exceptional one among all the exceptional geniuses. After all, previously, there had only been one person that made it through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate. And he was known as the #1 genius in Dragon Palace, Bai Cheng. Yang Zexuan is amazing, Yirufeng said, then sighed with emotion. Having sighed for a while, the Black and White Palace Masters looked at Yirufeng and Jian Wushuang. Yirufeng, you can let this little guy you brought go through the Dragon Gate now, Palace Master White said, completely ignoring Jian Wushuang. The Palace Masters had a high status, so the geniuses who had gone through the Dragon Gate were only worth a glance to them. Only a peerless genius like Yang Zexuan could excite the two Palace Masters and receive their enthusiastic treatment. Little guy, you should go. Remember, you should try your best to go to the highest level you can reach, said Yirufeng. Okay, said Jian Wushuang, then he nodded and went straight towards the golden pavilion without paying attention to the gazes of the people around him. He quickly entered the golden pavilion. The first level of the Dragon Gate. A red-haired man was sitting cross-legged on the empty ground. When Jian Wushuang walked inside, the man suddenly glared at Jian Wushuang and said, "Little guy, if you beat me, you can go to the next level. Come on." As soon as he finished speaking, the red-haired man began to brandish his large axe, which was surrounded by a blast of invisible airflow. In an instant, the large axe slashed toward his opponent. Jian Wushuang immediately swung his triple kill sword to block the blow. Then he directly took the chance to strike back, scratching the garment of the red-haired man. Obviously, the red-haired man was defeated. He made it through the first level. Chapter 63, the fourth level. On the first floor, the opponent I met was good at axemanship, but he did not comprehend any of the essence realm of heaven and earth. Therefore, it was easy to defeat him. Jian Wushuang thought privately, then he entered the second floor. The opponent he faced on the second floor had comprehended a trace of the essence realm of heaven and earth. It was the Gale essence, but only the initial stage, so Jian Wushuang still defeated him easily. On the third floor, Jian Wushuang faced a much stronger opponent. After all, one must pass through the third level, at the least, to enter Dragon Palace. Naturally, it was more difficult. Go to hell. An ice-cold sword light flashed before disappearing in an instant. In the end, Jian Wushuang defeated him with the first move of anonymous swordsmanship. On the fourth floor, Jian Wushuang's opponent was a black-clothed elder, who held a purple soft sword in his hand. Chuu. Another ice-cold sword light flashed. Once again, it was the first move of anonymous swordsmanship, blood shadow. Formless swordsmanship. The black-clothed elder smiled slightly and said, "What a coincidence, I can use the sword essence of Gale too." The same ice-cold dazzling sword light appeared in the black-clothed elder's hand. They were brandishing two of the same sword shadows with the same sword essence. Not only that, both of them released nearly the same spiritual power because the opponent was from the Dragon Gate. Clang! The two sword edges met. What? Jian Wushuang was astonished and downcast. He could clearly tell that the swordsmanship used by the grey-clothed elder was faster than his, even if it was only by a little. His comprehension of the sword principle of Gale is higher than mine. Jian Wushuang realized immediately. Sword-killing movement, Jian Wushuang followed with the second move of anonymous swordsmanship. Haha, it's useless. In the Dragon Gate, the real test is in your comprehension of essence realm of heaven and earth. Martial arts technique and swordsmanship don't make a big difference here. Besides, I can use sword-killing movement too. The killing intent from the purple soft sword in the black-clothed elder's hand exploded, attacking with a sword light which was equal to the one Jian Wushuang released. Once again, two equal sword lights met, and the black-clothed elder suppressed him again. Little boy, give it up. You are too weak in the sword principle of Gale to pass the fourth level, the black-clothed elder said with a smile. Really? Jian Wushuang's expression became serious, then he said, what about this move? After saying that, a heavy sword essence was released. Jian Wushuang swung his long sword with great momentum. It's Earth Sword Essence. The black-clothed elder's expression changed. It's not easy to comprehend the essence realm of heaven and earth. Comprehending one was difficult, to comprehend two at the same time was much more difficult. Yang Zexuan, who passed through the 8th level just now, was a super genius that comprehended two at the same time. The black-clothed elder didn't expect that the little guy standing in front of him, who was under 20 years old, not only had a high level of comprehension in the sword essence of Gale, but also comprehended Earth Sword Essence at the same time. A sword shadow with great momentum rushed straight towards him, as if it could chop up a mountain. After perceiving the great amount of power contained in the sword shadow, the black-clothed elder's countenance changed a little. He didn't fight back recklessly, quickly choosing to dodge it instead. However, before the elder could use his sword to attack, Jian Wushuang changed his sword essence again. He used the sword essence of Gale along with the first move of anonymous swordsmanship, Blood Shadow. He can shift between the sword essences of Gale and Earth so easily. The black-clothed elder was surprised and smiled bitterly. The sword essences of Earth and Gale. One was massive and majestic with power and influence, while the other was flexible and visionary. If he could perfectly transition between them, these two sword essences would produce a terrible power which the grey-clothed elder could not oppose. The 4th level of the Dragon Gate, passed. As for the 5th level, the opponent Jian Wushuang faced also comprehended the sword essence of Earth. Not only that, he was stronger than Jian Wushuang in sword essence of Earth comprehension and used it more freely. Jian Wushuang tried his best, fighting with him for quite a while. But finally, he was defeated, causing him to stop at the 5th level. When Jian Wushuang walked out of the Golden Pavilion, all the experts of Dragon Palace that were waiting outside looked at him. Passing through the 4th level is good enough, so he is qualified to enter Dragon Palace. However, there is a large gap in skill between him and Yang Zexuan. An extraordinary genius like Yang Zexuan is rare. It is impossible to come by two in a single day. Everyone in the area was secretly discussing it. Little guy, what's your name and how old are you? Palace Master White walked to him and asked directly. Swordsman, said Jian Wushuang, still chose to use the pseudonym, 17 years old. 17 years old. Everyone in the area was astonished, including both of the palace masters. Then, Palace Master White smiled and said, haha, good. It seems that we have one more genius. It's rare for a 17-year-old kid to pass through the 4th level of the Dragon Gate. You could be ranked between middle and upper among the many disciples in Dragon Palace. Palace Master Black, who stayed silent, nodded in agreement. Yirufeng, you brought a good disciple to Dragon Palace. Palace Master White looked over at Yirufeng. I just did my duty, said Yirufeng, remaining humble. Yang Zexuan, swordsman, from now on, you are both disciples of Dragon Palace. Congratulations for becoming one of the many monsters in Tianzong Dynasty, said Palace Master White with a laugh. Jian Wushuang and Yang Zexuan stood side by side. After hearing this, Jian Wushuang smiled slightly and Yang Zexuan was indifferent as always. Come with me. I will take you to visit Dragon Palace, said Palace Master White, intending to escort both Jian Wushuang and Yang Zexuan. Suddenly, the surroundings totally calmed down. A white-haired man wearing white, slowly walked into the people's sights. His hair is as white as snow, the strongest genius, Bai Cheng. The strongest disciple in Dragon Palace. It's him. He actually appeared. As he approached, all the disciples of Dragon Palace watched him with grim looks on their faces. Is he Bai Cheng? Jian Wushuang slightly squinted his eyes while hearing Bai Cheng's name mentioned in their discussion. The strongest person in Dragon Palace. Yang Zexuan raised his head and saw the white figure, with cold and prideful eyes, walking slowly in their direction. The white-haired man in white stopped. His black eyes, full of arrogance, swept over them as the sides of his mouth stretched upwards to form a meaningful smile. I heard that a newcomer passed through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate today, so I wanted to see for myself. Chapter 64, Ranked at the Bottom. Palace Master White, may I know which one of these two passed the 8th level? Though he seemed kind and gentle, there was a trace of insidious coldness inside his eyes when looking at Jian Wushuang and Yang Zexuan. Palace Master White instantly introduced them one by one, starting with Jian Wushuang. This is Swordsman, 17 years old. He passed through the 4th level. Oh. Bai Cheng glanced at Jian Wushuang with a faint smile and said, the 4th level. He would be ranked at the bottom among the many disciples of Dragon Palace. But he's young. If there are no accidents, it's possible for him to pass the 7th level before 20. He can reach the same level as Golden Dragon Ambassador yet and would barely be an expert in the Tianzong dynasty. Hearing what he said, Yirufeng smiled faintly and ignored it. He did not dare to show any disdain. However, Jian Wushuang frowned and felt unpleasant. I might reach the level of Yirufeng. I might barely become an expert. Even I can't imagine what I might achieve in the future. What makes Bai Cheng think he can judge me with one glance in such a condescending manner, acting as if what he says will definitely come true in the future? How arrogant and conceited can he be? Even though he was unhappy, he didn't openly offend Bai Cheng. This is Yang Zexuan. He is the one who passed the 8th level and he is currently 21 years old, replied Palace Master White. Bai Cheng turned to face Yang Zexuan and fixed his eyes on him before saying, to pass through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate at 21 years old, you're promising. In Dragon Palace, I'm afraid that there is no one but me who could suppress you. You mean you are stronger than me right now? Yang Zexuan's expression fell. Bai Cheng didn't answer him, he just smiled confidently. Palace Master White, no one is in the Dragon Gate, right? Bai Cheng asked. Yes. Palace Master White nodded. Okay, I have not been tested in a long time. Today, let me give it a try. After saying that, he immediately entered the Dragon Gate. Both Jian Wushuang and Yang Zexuan, who were supposed to leave, stopped and looked carefully at the golden pavilion to see what would happen. After entering the Dragon Gate, Bai Cheng quickly passed through the 1st level, causing it to light up. Then he continued moving forward smoothly. He passed 8 levels in succession. Bai Cheng entered the 9th level and stayed in it for a long time before the 9th level finally lit up, releasing a golden light. The 9th level of Dragon Gate, passed. He actually passed the 9th level. Yirufeng was shocked and couldn't say anything. It should be known that even if it was him, he would not be able to pass it, even after trying his best. However, Bai Cheng succeeded. He really was the top genius in Dragon Palace. This is the strongest person in Dragon Palace, so awesome. Though Yang Zexuan is great, he is new and young. He cannot compete with Bai Cheng yet. We thought Yang Zexuan would be strong enough to be Bai Cheng's opponent, but the truth is that he is far away from him for now. A large number of disciples of Dragon Palace in front of the Dragon Gate were discussing the recent events secretly. Not long after that, Bai Cheng walked out of the Golden Pavilion. Under the watchful eyes and shocked expressions, Bai Cheng walked over to Yang Zexuan again and smiled slightly before saying, "You'll need to work harder, freshman." After saying that, Bai Cheng left without looking back. Since Jian Wushuang only passed the 4th level, Bai Cheng did not even give him a second glance. He is really arrogant. Jian Wushuang licked his lips, the battle intent vaguely rising in his eyes. Yang Zexuan, what do you think? Jian Wushuang suddenly asked. About what? Yang Zexuan looked at him indifferently. I don't like him, Don't you want to defeat him? Jian Wushuang asked. Crush him under my feet? He won't be qualified to be my opponent within 1 year, replied Yang Zexuan. Hearing that, the corners of Jian Wushuang's mouth quirked up. All of you are so arrogant and conceited. Okay, you are peerless geniuses, so it's normal to be proud of yourselves. Besides, you really are strong. Jian Wushuang thought. Someone who just joined, passed the 8th level of the Dragon Gate, and the other one passed the 9th level. However, he could only pass the 4th level after trying his best. So there was a huge gap between him and those two peerless geniuses. The wider the gap was, the more it inspired him. There was a gap now, so what? It should be known that he had only started comprehending the essence realm of heaven and earth 4 months ago. It's unbelievable to comprehend both of the sword essences of Gale and Earth to such a high level within 4 months. No matter whether it was Bai Cheng or Yang Zexuan, they were both older than him and they had spent much more time comprehending the essence realm of heaven and earth as well. Bai Cheng asserted that I could only be a golden dragon messenger like Yirufeng in the future. Let's see. Jian Wushuang snorted. All right, go back to your places. Yang Zexuan, Swordsman, you both follow me, Palace Master White said. Jian Wushuang and Yang Zexuan followed Palace Master White. Yirufeng and the Golden Dragon Messenger who brought Yang Zexuan here followed Palace Master Black to receive their rewards. These Golden Dragon Messengers had the right to recommend disciples. Every recommendation that passed the test and became a disciple of Dragon Palace would earn the Golden Dragon Messenger a reward based on the strength of the disciple. In the Dragon Palace, both Jian Wushuang and Yang Zexuan were curiously examining their surroundings while Palace Master White was telling them the basic information and rules of Dragon Palace. Dragon Palace is a cultivation sanctuary. You both became disciples of Dragon Palace means that you are talented. In Dragon Palace, there are 238 disciples, not counting both of you. Among the 238 disciples, only one had passed the 8th level of the Dragon Gate, and that was Bai Cheng. But now he has passed the 9th level. 16 disciples passed the 7th level. 67 passed the 6th level. 141 disciples passed the 5th level. The 13 disciples left passed the 4th level. After saying this, Palace Master White could not help glancing at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang also could not help touching his nose with an embraced expression. There are 238 disciples in total and only 13 of them were at the 4th level. Most disciples were all at the 5th level or higher. It seems that Bai Cheng was right, I am at the lowest level in Dragon Palace right now. However, Jian Wushuang didn't worry about being at the bottom. It didn't mean that he would be at the bottom forever. So many geniuses are in Dragon Palace. However, the more geniuses the better for me. Jian Wushuang's eyes were sparkling with excitement. Chapter 65, 4 Matchless Heroes. Dragon Palace is known as a holy place for cultivation, and it's worthy of the name. Palace Master White continued. The 4 temples of earth, fire, water, and wind, the secret land of heaven and earth, and the secret pavilion are the 3 treasures of Dragon Palace. They are of great help to the disciples of Dragon Palace. As for the benefits of the 3 treasures, you will gradually understand them in the future. In addition, there are also 2 places for practicing. The Dragon Gate and Heavenly Palace. The Dragon Gate, which you have just tried, is the best place to test the progress of the Dragon Palace disciples. It can accurately gauge the disciples' perception to the essence realm of heaven and earth. As for the Heavenly Palace, that is used to test overall strength. Usually, no one will go to the Heavenly Palace. Only disciples who have enough strength to leave Dragon Palace will go to the Heavenly Palace. Palace Master White simply explained a few basic conditions of Dragon Palace again. Not long after that, she arrived at the manor with Jian Wushuang and Yang Zexuan. Each disciple of Dragon Palace will have a single house. Your rooms are also in this manner, Palace Master White informed them. Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan quickly noticed that the manor contained 4 independent houses, even though the area was not big. Fatty Wang. Palace Master White's voice echoed throughout the area. Oh, I'm coming, a rough voice echoed back. After which, a big fat man in a blouse hurried out of one room and a timid figure hurried out of another room. Jian Wushuang looked at the 2 incoming people. That big fat man was not tall, but he was extremely large, weighing nearly 300 jins. That big face, larger than an ordinary person, was covered with a smile. But the smile seemed very quirky no matter what angle you looked from. As for the other person, she was a tall and thin girl with long blue hair. A young girl who appeared to be only 14 or 15 years old. She followed the big fat man, looking down in a very shy manner. It seemed like she was afraid to make eye contact with Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan. Palace Master White glanced at the big fat man and told him, from now on, they will live in the manor with you. You can take them and familiarize them with environment of Dragon Palace. No problem. The big fat man nodded and promised. These are your disciple tokens, which contain your points. In Dragon Palace, points are very important. Many of the resources in Dragon Palace can only be redeemed using points, said Palace Master White. Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan took the tokens and examined the numbers. 2,000 points. Jian Wushuang felt excited, then he looked at Yang Zixuan's token. He had a full 6,000 points. I only have 2,000 points, but he has 6,000 points, 3 times mine. Is it possible that the points depend on how many levels you pass through in the Dragon Gate? Jian Wushuang secretly pondered. In his opinion, that was the only possibility given the situation. Alright little guys, make sure to work hard. Many years from now, I hope to see another 2 excellent disciples emerge from my Dragon Palace, said Palace Master White, who smiled and then immediately departed. After Palace Master White walked away, the big fat man immediately looked over and introduced himself. My name is Wang Yuan, and the girl next to me is Suro. Swordsman, Jian Wushuang said. Yang Zixuan also introduced himself. Swordsman, Yang Zixuan, your arrival made the manor considerably full. Come, for the first meeting, the 4 of us need to have a quick drink, replied Wang Yuan with a smile. Then, he turned up his hand and a wine pot appeared. After the stopper was opened, the aroma of the wine soon spread it out. Smelling the aroma, Jian Wushuang smiled. While on the other side, Yang Zixuan's indifferent expression also slightly relaxed a bit. After which, the 4 of them drank in front of the stone table in this manner. After drinking a few glasses of wine in succession, the atmosphere was no longer so boring. At this time, Wang Yuan said, Swordsman, Yang Zixuan, we will not live in the manor together for more than several years. It's too polite to call each other by name. What if we call each other as brothers and sisters according to age? I'm the oldest, so I'm the elder brother. Yang Zixuan, your age is only a little younger than mine, so you are the second brother. Swordsman, you, the third brother. As for Suro, she's our 4th sister. All right. Wang Yuan smiled and looked around. Okay. Jian Wushuang nodded his head. After all, they will live in the same manner in the future, the relationship among them should be better. And after drinking, the 3 of them all left a good impression on him. Wang Yuan, he was a generous and careless person without any scheming. This kind of person is the most worthwhile to make friends with, except his talkativeness. Yang Zixuan, as indifferent as he is, did not put on airs. It's said that he is the one who broke into the 8th level of the Dragon Palace when he arrived. With such talent, he was still willing to sit down with them to have a few drinks. His eyes did not have the slightest bit of arrogance. For the point, making friends with him was very worthwhile. As for the last one, the little girl Suro, she's so timid and shy that she didn't dare to say one word while they were drinking. Jian Wushuang felt a little strange in the beginning, but later he heard from Fatty Wang that when Suro was a little girl, she had been sold to a mansion as a servant girl. To be a servant girl since childhood, it's normal for her to be so timid. However, this timid little girl had a great reputation in Dragon Palace. As mentioned before, among the disciples of Dragon Palace, only Bai Cheng had passed through the 8th floor. There were 16 disciples that had passed through the 7th level and Suro was one of them. And most importantly, this year, Suro was only 14 years old. The 14-year-old Suro broke through the 7th level of the Dragon Gate. What does that mean? So, after Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan learned of her achievement, they were both astonished. Similarly, Suro is also worth making friends with. Therefore, after hearing the proposal of Wang Yuan, Jian Wushuang immediately agreed. Yang Zixuan, as always, was indifferent, giving neither refusal nor opposition. As for the timid girl Suro, she nodded her head shyly. Haha, since there is no objection, let us make this decision final. From now on, the four of us are siblings. We shall share happiness and hardship together, said Wang Yuan, then he smiled and lifted the cup for a toast. Without any hesitation, Jian Wushuang and Suro immediately raised their glasses. As for Yang Zixuan, he pondered for a while, then raised the glass too. Kuang. With the toasting finished, the famous Tianzong dynasty and the four matchless heroes of the heaven and the earth were born. Chapter 66, Secret Land of Heaven and Earth. After drinks, Wang Yuan was hanging out with Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan. You two have just arrived at Dragon Palace. Let me show you around. I'll take you to the treasure troves of Dragon Palace, Wang Yuan said. All right. Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan nodded. Dragon Palace covered a large area and was famous for 3 treasure troves, 4 temples of earth, fire, water, and wind, secret land of heaven and earth, and secret pavilion. The first place Wang Yuan brought them to was 4 temples of earth, fire, water, and wind. Look, this is 4 temples of earth, fire, water, and wind. Wang Yuan pointed to the 4 pavilions which covered a wide area. Each pavilion had a gilded character engraved on the lintel, earth, fire, water, and wind respectively. The 4 temples of earth, fire, water, and wind are where the disciples of Dragon Palace visit the most. Earth, fire, water, and wind represent the 4 kinds of essence realm of heaven and earth, which are, earth essence realm, raging fire realm, water drop essence realm, and gale essence realm. There are 6 temple masters in each temple. They're the top experts in the world and have reached the highest level of comprehending essence realm of heaven and earth. The reason why disciples of Dragon Palace often visit 4 temples is that the temple masters usually give lessons in the temples, displaying some martial arts techniques and giving disciples some advice. If you have any problem in comprehending essence realm of heaven and earth, you can consult these temple masters. After receiving their guidance, you might be enlightened. On hearing this, Jian Wushuang's and Yang Zixuan's eyes lit up. If I have any problem in comprehending essence realm, I can consult these temple masters. What's more, there are 6 temple masters dealing with each essence realm. The 6 temple masters in each temple should be good at different aspects. It would be superior to following a top expert. Although a top expert would try his best to teach someone, he was alone and studied only one aspect. If he encountered unfamiliar fields, he would not know how to instruct them. In Dragon Palace, 4 temples covered 4 kinds of essence realms of heaven and earth. Each temple had 6 powerful temple masters, who studied various fields. Therefore, the disciples did not worry that they would encounter an unsolvable problem. Now we come to the secret land of heaven and earth. Wang Yuan led the way. Then they stood in front of a majestic palace. 2 golden armored sergeants kept guard at the palace entrance. Wang Yuan said, Secret land of heaven and earth is special and helpful at comprehending the essence realm of heaven and earth. If you want to enter secret land of heaven and earth, you need to pay 1000 points to access the palace, and you can only stay inside for 2 hours each time. Though it is only 2 hours, I'm sure you'll benefit greatly from each visit. Moreover, you're newcomers in Dragon Palace, so each of you can enter the palace for free 3 times. Oh! Jian Wushuang said, raising his eyebrows. He had just been surprised at the 4 temples of earth, fire, water, and wind. The secret land of heaven and earth was as famous as the 4 temples. Jian Wushuang was somewhat curious about it, as the palace, with the harsh requirements to access it, must be extraordinary. How about it? Do you want to have a try? Wang Yuan smiled mysteriously. Sure. Jian Wushuang gave a little smile and then glanced at Yang Zixuan. Second elder brother, you go first. Yang Zixuan nodded and directly walked toward the palace. The 2 golden armored sergeants stepped forwards, but immediately allowed Yang Zixuan to enter secret land of heaven and earth. 2 hours later, Yang Zixuan came out of it with a blank look. Second elder brother. Jian Wushuang frowned. Don't disturb him. He's in the state of comprehension. Wang Yuan was not surprised at all and spoke to Jian Wushuang. Third younger brother, it's your turn. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly, and then he stepped towards the secret land of heaven and earth. The 2 golden armored sergeants walked forward again, and let Jian Wushuang enter after realizing that he was a newcomer. What on earth is stored in the secret land of heaven and earth? Jian Wushuang stepped into the secret land of heaven and earth with a flicker of curiosity. As soon as he entered, Jian Wushuang immediately felt himself surrounded by darkness. There was only a glimmer of light ahead in the endless darkness. Jian Wushuang could not help but look at the light. He was totally absorbed in it. The glimmer of light suddenly changed into a sword, which contained sword essence of gale, earth sword essence of raging fire, and sword essence of the water drop. He knew the 4 kinds of sword essence were unfathomable, although he had not comprehended the last 2. Jian Wushuang drew out triple kill sword behind him, the sword light starting to move. One after another, the ethereal sword light moved flexibly. Jian Wushuang then started to perform the anonymous swordsmanship. He easily showed the first move of anonymous swordsmanship, Blood Shadow. He did not encounter any problem either in performing the second move of anonymous swordsmanship, sword killing movement. The third move of anonymous swordsmanship, named Expeditious Maneuver, was a terrifying killing move, emphasizing absolute speed. Jian Wushuang had not comprehended this move. He thought it was because his speed at unleashing the sword was not fast enough. In fact, it was related to his inferior comprehension of sword essence of gale. However, Jian Wushuang could not help wielding his long sword and slowly performed this move in this special situation. Hu! The sword light flashed and then disappeared with the wind. He naturally performed the third move of anonymous swordsmanship, Expeditious Maneuver. Nevertheless, it was not over. As Jian Wushuang continued to wield long sword, the sword light became grander and more massive. Every beam of the sword light contained sword essence of earth. One strike after another. Suddenly, the glimmer of light disappeared. Jian Wushuang was slightly surprised and blankly stared into space. 2 hours, I've run out of time. Jian Wushuang looked into the darkness, sighing. Then he turned to leave. Jian Wushuang walked out of secret land of heaven and earth and saw his 3 sworn brothers waiting outside, but he ignored them and directly sat on the ground, with eyes closed. Wang Yuan, Yang Zixuan, and Suro were not angry at Jian Wushuang. They knew Jian Wushuang's state and did not want to disturb him. After a while, Jian Wushuang finally breathed a sigh of relief and immediately stood up. How about it? Wang Yuan asked with a smile. Good, very good. Jian Wushuang nodded heavily. The benefits from practicing in secret land of heaven and earth for 2 hours can be comparable to that from earnest cultivation in a month. Chapter 67, The Secret Pavilion. What Jian Wushuang said was the truth. He had merely spent 2 hours inside the secret land of heaven and earth but made great progress in his understanding of the sword essence. My sword essence of earth and gale have both made huge progress in the third form of formless swordsmanship. Jian Wushuang was pleasantly surprised that those 2 hours were equivalent to his 1 month's worth of hard work, or more. Same here. I made great progress, too, Yang Zixuan said seriously. Haha. This is one of the 3 treasures of the Dragon Palace. The cost of entering it so high, naturally there's a high return too. You can enter the place 3 times. Since you've entered once, you must treasure your 2 remaining chances, Wang Yuan said, smiling. Come with me. I'll show you the last treasure of the Dragon Palace. They followed Wang Yuan to the entrance of a heavily guarded tall attic that exuded a faintly ancient scent. This attic is the most important of the 3 treasures of Dragon Palace, the secret pavilion. There are countless treasures in the secret pavilion, but you can only take them in exchange for points. Go in and have a look, Tian Bao said. Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan immediately entered the secret pavilion. Inside the large and spacious secret pavilion, the treasures were divided into many categories. There were cultivation methods, martial arts techniques, elixir pills, and exotic classes. With a heavenly creation skill that defied the natural order, Jian Wushuang had no need for cultivation methods. Neither did he need elixirs and exotic classes for now, so he made a beeline for the martial arts techniques section. The martial arts techniques section was divided into swordsmanship, knife methods, spear methods, and so on. Jian Wushuang left Yang Zixuan's side and headed straight for the swordsmanship section. The section stored nearly thousands of rare books on swordsmanship. Fortunately for Jian Wushuang, there was a list that he could refer to. Otherwise, he might need to flip through each book to find the one on his swordsmanship. The list detailed a number of swordsmanship, a basic introduction for each swordsmanship, as well as the points needed for exchange. But just from a quick glance, Jian Wushuang realized the lowest rank swordsmanship on this list was already top-notch ones. There was also no shortage of sword skills. Sword skills were beyond the scope of so-called swordsmanship. Generally, one needed to use sword skills with a display of sword essence understanding at the same time. Formless swordsmanship, the first item he looked for was the formless swordsmanship. He found out from Yirufeng that the formless swordsmanship was none other than the anonymous swordsmanship. The formless swordsmanship had 9 sword movements and what he had been cultivating was merely the simplest first 3 of the swordsmanship. Found it? Jian Wushuang's eyes brightened when he found the formless swordsmanship on the list. Formless swordsmanship, the sword skill acknowledged by the Tianzong dynasty as world's number 1. It was suitable for warriors who understood the sword essence of Gale. There were 9 movements, and each was stronger than the one before it. Exchange for the first 3 movements with 200 points. Exchange for the middle 3 movements with 2,000 points. The last 3 movements are unavailable. So it's true they only have the middle 3 movements, not the last 3. Jian Wushuang shook his head. He had heard this from Yirufeng on their way here. Though there were 9 sword strokes of the formless swordsmanship, the most powerful latter 3 were long lost to history. The Dragon Palace might be the cultivation sanctuary of the Tianzong dynasty, but not even they could recover sword movements in a swordsmanship that had been lost. I'll need to spend 2,000 points alone just for the middle 3 movements. Jian Wushuang frowned secretly, for his current score was precisely that number. There's no hurry. Let's look at other sword skills. Jian Wushuang was not anxious to make his decision yet. He started reading the category of swordsmanship for sword essence of earth understanding. His comprehension of sword essence of earth was, in fact, far higher than sword essence of Gale. It was a pity that he did not have any suitable sword skill to display it all this while. Even in the mansion of Sword Marquis, the first-class swordsmanship he learned leaned toward the earth essence. But that was not even a first-class swordsmanship, let alone a super first-class swordsmanship. It was too weak that he could not even show the might of his sword essence of earth to its fullest. Therefore, his immediate priority was finding a suitable sword skill in the sword essence of earth. There were many sword skills on the list that was suitable for his goals. He finally selected 3 after carefully pondering over each one. They were Mark of Earth, Immemorial Sword Skill, and Formless Sword Wave. Mark of Earth required 2,500 points, while Immemorial Sword Skill required 3,000 points. Formless Sword Wave was divided into 2 sections, with each being 2,500 points. Though each of these sword tactics has its own advantages, I think the Formless Sword Ripple seems superior. It also suits me better, but the exchange rate is higher. Jian Wushuang frowned. The 2 sections would cost him 5,000 points. At the moment, he only had 2,000 points. Whatever. Since I don't have enough points for the other 2 sword skills now, I'll just not exchange for now. I'll just wait and find a way to get more points. It wouldn't be too late by then. He then left the swordsmanship section and began taking a stroll through the elixir pills and exotic classes section. There were all kinds of odd treasures and elixirs here, many of which were hard to find in the outside world. In the secret pavilion, one only needed points to get them. Before long, Jian Wushuang left the secret pavilion with Yang Zixuan. But before he left, Yang Zixuan spent 4,000 points to exchange for a martial arts technique. Jian Wushuang could only shrug his shoulders helplessly. There was nothing he could about it. Yang Zixuan had more points than him after all. When he came out of the sword pavilion, Wang Yuan came up to him. "What do you think about the treasures in the secret pavilion?" "There are many of them," Jian Wushuang said. "I've once visited the storehouse of a great power, but it's nothing compared to this place," Yang Zixuan added. "Ha ha. Of course. This is the secret pavilion of the Dragon Palace. How can those so-called sects of the Tianzong dynasty compare to? As the disciples of this place, we can redeem the treasures if we have enough points." Wang Yuan smiled. "Boss Wang Yuan, how can we get these points?" Jian Wushuang asked. "There are many ways. I'll tell you one by one," Wang Yuan replied, immediately describing each method. First method, go through the Dragon Gate Pass. There are 13 stories in the Dragon Gate. Starting at the 3rd level, you can get 1,000 points for passing through each level. After the 9th floor, you get 2,000 points each. I heard you mention that one of you passed the 8th floor and the other the 4th. Old 2, you earned 5,000 points. Old 3, you earned 1,000 points. But every newcomer also get 1,000 points for free, so you have 6,000 and 2,000 points respectively. Chapter 68, Battle for Points. The second way is to complete a task. Dragon Palace provides various tasks for experience. Some of them are difficult, some are relatively simple. You will obtain points according to the complexity of the task. The third way is to battle for points. On hearing this, both Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan were puzzled. They could easily understand the first 2 ways, but could not figure out what the battle for points was. The battle for points is actually dueling. Wang Yuan spoke with a smile. There are more than 200 disciples of Dragon Palace with varying strength. As exceptional geniuses, they can be somewhat arrogant. As a result, they often fight with each other in Dragon Palace. Since there are fights, there are duels and bets. As for the bets, it's up to the 2 duelers. Got it? Jian Wushuang and Yang Zixuan immediately understood. Speaking of the battles for points, third younger brother, you should be careful. Wang Yuan suddenly spoke. Why? Jian Wushuang looked at him in surprise. Wang Yuan said, I just mentioned there are 3 ways to get points. First, going through the Dragon Gate. Many disciples will wait a long time to challenge, and they may not be successful. What's more, they can only gain a few points there. Second, complete tasks for experience. But, only difficult tasks offer a lot of points. Disciples of Dragon Palace will face death trials while performing these tasks, so it's very dangerous. Only the third way, battle for points, is simple. You only need to challenge someone weaker than you and settle the bets. Disciples who have stayed in Dragon Palace for a period of time, know the other disciples very well, so they won't easily accept challenges. However, you and second younger brother are different because you're newcomers. Jian Wushuang understood. You mean the other disciples of Dragon Palace will want to challenge me? Jian Wushuang asked. Right. Wang Yuan nodded. They are inclined to bully those weaker than them. You have just entered Dragon Palace, so they will treat you as a weakling. They will try their best to challenge you to a duel before you have time to use treasures of Dragon Palace to improve your strength. Of course, second younger brother is also a newcomer, but he made it through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate. He's so powerful that no one will dare to challenge him. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. We'll reach the martial arts practice field soon, where many disciples of Dragon Palace gather. Battle for points is usually held there. Third younger brother, you must remember my words. If someone challenges you, you can refuse directly or just ignore them. They cannot do anything to you. Wang Yuan reminded Jian Wushuang. Refuse? Why should I refuse? Jian Wushuang said with a smile. Don't be rash, third younger brother. It is not easy for you to earn points. Do not lose them by acting on impulse. Wang Yuan continued to persuade him. Don't worry. I know what to do, Jian Wushuang said with a smile. The four of them had finally arrived at the huge martial arts practice field. The martial arts practice field covered an extremely large area. There were quite a few disciples of Dragon Palace around the center of it. At the moment, all of them looked at the four people who just stepped inside. Ha, newcomers. I hear there are 2 new disciples. Those 2 must be the newcomers. The man with a cold expression is called Yang Zixuan. It's inconceivable that he has already gone through the 8th level of the Dragon Gate. He must be a monster on the same level as Bai Cheng. Yang Zixuan, an exceptional genius. We're not comparable to him. The other person was called Swordsman. I hear he only made it through the 4th level. The 4th level means that his strength is at the bottom of Dragon Palace. Going through the 4th level is worth 1000 points. And since he's a newcomer, he also received 1000 points for free. In other words, he has 2000 points now. Yang Zixuan should have attracted more attention, because of his brilliant results. Nevertheless, none of the disciples of Dragon Palace looked at him. All eyes were fixed on Jian Wushuang. Their eyes were full of expectation. It looks like I'm popular. Jian Wushuang noticed that their eyes sparkled with eagerness, the corner of his mouth lifted up. Haha, you are Swordsman, right? A laughter could be heard along with the question. Then a red-haired young man with a saber on his back appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. The aura of spiritual power in the exceptional spiritual sea realm spread out. He said, with an expectant look, I'm Zhang Tao. I hear you have gone through the 4th level of the Dragon Gate. So have I. Do you have the guts to have a fair fight with me? Looking at Zhang Tao, Jian Wushuang was delighted in his heart. The other disciples of Dragon Palace were furious. Damn it! He got there first. Zhang Tao is really fast. I hope the newcomer does not accept his challenge. Zhang Tao. Wang Yuan frowned and shouted in a low voice. It's been a year since you went through the 4th level. Now your strength has improved greatly to the point that you can challenge the 5th level. Aren't you embarrassed to talk about having a fair fight with my brother? Third younger brother, leave him alone, said Wang Yuan, winking at Jian Wushuang. What? Are you afraid of fighting with me? If you became a disciple of Dragon Palace, you must be a genius. Don't you have the guts? Zhang Tao spoke directly, then laughed out. Zhang Tao, right. Jian Wushuang raised his head and stared at Zhang Tao with a faint smile. You don't need to provoke me. I accept your challenge. Tell me how many points you want to bet. Cool. Zhang Tao was glad that Jian Wushuang accepted his challenge. I know you should have 2,000 points. I will not bet for all of them, just 1,500 points. That will leave you with 500 points to choose a manual from the General Hall in Secret Pavilion. What do you think? 1,500 points? Zhang Tao, you have a huge appetite. Wang Yuan spoke angrily. It's true. He has a total of 2,000 points. Only, you want 1,500 points. Isn't that too much? A disciple of Dragon Palace spoke up from the side. He also coveted Jian Wushuang's 2,000 points. 1,500 points. It's too much indeed. Well, I can bet 1,000 points, Jian Wushuang said. Okay, 1,000 points. Zhang Tao agreed without hesitation, secretly delighted. Zhang Tao thought that Jian Wushuang was not his match. Jian Wushuang had just become a disciple of Dragon Palace and had only made it through the 4th level of the Dragon Gate. Zhang Tao went through the 4th level a year ago. Since then, his strength had improved greatly with the help of the resources from Dragon Palace. Therefore, he thought he would win this fight no matter what would happen. He was over the moon when thinking about the 1,000 points. It was not a small amount for him, as it was hard to gain points in Dragon Palace. Haha, watch out. Zhang Tao spoke. He directly rushed forward. With a single stride, he appeared before Jian Wushuang and drew the saber on his back. Chapter 69, The First Win. Swish. With one chop, the air was immediately cut. So fast. Jian Wushuang was stunned, and he thought to himself, they are undoubtedly Dragon Palace disciples. Jian Wushuang was very calm. The movement was swift, but his sword was faster. Swish. A dazzling glare of sword light fleeted. It was still the first blood shadow move of formless swordsmanship. A clashing sound could be heard when the two swords met. There was only a slight gap between these two powers. You will be defeated, Zhang Tao said in a low voice. Ridiculous, Jian Wushuang replied with a laugh. These two people began to display their power to its furthest extent. One used the knife, and the other the sword. Their splendid speed reached its peak. Clang! 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 Numerous clashing sounds could be heard. The blade lights and sword shadows were extremely rapid. Both Jian Wushuang and Zhang Tao sensed sword principle of Gale, and it was very powerful. Zhang Tao had achieved the 4th level a year ago. Although it was not certain that he would achieve the 5th level, he had been able to fight with the level keepers in the 5th level for a long time. Jian Wushuang did not have a deep comprehension of Gale sword principle, and he was not as powerful as Zhang Tao. But he had obtained a better understanding of sword principle of Gale during the 2-hour cultivation in the secret land of heaven and earth. Thus he was no weaker than Zhang Tao now. The sword light moved and disappeared with the wind. The third move of formless swordsmanship, expeditious maneuver. It's formless swordsmanship, and it's the third move. Is this expeditious swordsmanship? Unbelievable. The surrounding Dragon Palace disciples were amazed. These disciples were familiar with the first sword skill of Tianzong dynasty, and several of them had cultivated the formless swordsmanship. All of them understood the high requirement of practicing this move. Formless swordsmanship? So what? Zhang Tao roared. The saber in his hand split straight down with a bloody light flickering. It burst out in the blink of an eye. The scarlet light of the saber hit the sword light. The sword essence changed suddenly as Jian Wushuang twisted his wrist. It started as the sword essence of Gale, and suddenly became the heavy sword essence of Earth. What? Zhang Tao looked pale. Sword essence of Earth. The Dragon Palace disciples were shocked. It was very difficult to comprehend the essence realm of heaven and earth, and someone comprehending two types at the same time, not to mention both at a high level, was rarely seen. Very few disciples in Dragon Palace could comprehend two types of the realm at the same time. The swordsmanship Jian Wushuang exhibited was obviously the sword essence of earth. Sword essence of Gale converted perfectly to sword essence of earth. Sword edge swept Zhang Tao's sleeves, and rolled up his robe. Zhang was defeated in this battle. Lose. Has Zhang Tao lost? The entire martial arts practice field went quiet. The Dragon Palace disciples were shocked, some held contempt for Zhang Tao. Wang Yuan was amazed too. No one had expected this. A newcomer like Jian Wushuang could beat Zhang Tao. Only Jian Wushuang, himself, thought this was very normal. Relying on the perfectly converted sword essence of Gale and sword essence of Earth, I have fought for a long time at the 5th level. When I went through the Dragon Gate Pass, I improved my cultivation of these two sword essences after just 1 hour of learning Secret Land of Heaven and Earth. Now I'm confident I'll pass the 5th level. Zhang Tao, on the other hand, still has a way to go before reaching the 5th level. It is natural that I should beat him, I even didn't do my best. Jian Wushuang laughed at heart. True, he had not done his best. If he had, it would not have taken so long to beat Zhang Tao. Of course, he had his reasons for not doing his best from the beginning. Zhang Tao had a gloomy look on his face. He was in agony. He had lost indeed, and with so many people watching. He could not change it. He transferred 1,000 points to Jian Wushuang immediately. When he saw that his pledge number had reached 3,000, Jian Wushuang smiled and looked around. Is there anyone who wants to fight with me? He called out in a loud voice. Me, an ice-cold girl, stepped forward. Although Jian Wushuang beating Zhang Tao was beyond the expectations of many people, it did not count for anything. After all, Zhang Tao had only broken through to the 4th level, and he was not the top among those who were at this level. A duel is still 1,000 points. Jian Wushuang said. Good. The girl did not hesitate. She shot at him directly. Swish. A fierce blade slashed straight out. The blade's extreme speed caused a glimmer of heat. Ha ha, come on. Jian Wushuang laughed loudly. He moved his sword in a counter-attack stance. The girl had a high cultivation of blade essence of raging fire. She was close to the 5th level and even stronger than Zhang Tao. As she fought with Jian Wushuang, she soon discovered that Jian Wushuang not only had a strong ability using sword essence of Gale, but also the sword essence of Earth. Sometimes these two swordsmanships were very fast and smart, sometimes they were heavy as a mountain pressing overwhelmingly. Two great changes of the sword essence quickly suppressed her. The fight did not last long. This fight caused many disciples of Dragon Palace to sigh. If her cultivation of the blade essence of raging fire were higher, she would not have been suppressed, and she would have had a better chance of winning. Yeah, he was just a little stronger than her. Jian Wushuang was just slightly stronger than the girl, everyone could see it. Hence, the third challenger was ready to challenge. This challenger was much more powerful than the ice-cold girl. Everyone was expecting Jian Wushuang to be defeated in this fight. But the result was shocking. A narrow victory. The fight with the third challenger had lasted for nearly an hour. Jian Wushuang had finally obtained an extremely narrow victory. 3 consecutive fights had all been won. Jian Wushuang's points went from 2,000 to 5,000. The Dragon Palace disciples' expressions become a bit weird. They were not stupid. It was rather coincidental to win 3 fights in succession with such a trivial difference. Chapter 70, Do not reject anyone. He was victorious in all 3 battles, and all of them were narrow victories. What a lucky guy. This swordsman. Is he hiding his strength? Impossible. After all, he is just a newcomer. Those disciples of Dragon Palace knew that Jian Wushuang was only a newcomer who had passed the 4th level of Dragon Gate, therefore his strength should be very limited. However, they were very suspicious of him after he won these 3 consecutive battles, beating his opponents. A burly man came out among the crowd looking extremely domineering, wielding a thick broadsword. Lin Feng. Lin Feng came out. Disciples of Dragon Palace all looked at this burly man. Lin Feng, you have gone through the 5th level. Aren't you ashamed of challenging a newcomer? Wang Yuan fumed with a dark face. Although Jian Wushuang had defeated 3 challengers who were at the 4th level of the Dragon Gate, this burly man, Lin Feng, had passed the 5th level already. You are a swordsman. You should also have the strength to break through the 5th level. Why can't I challenge him? Lin Feng replied indifferently, and his eyes looked to Jian Wushuang. Of course you can. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly. To duel, it is still 1,000 points. Okay. Lin Feng nodded. Be careful. Whoosh. Lin Feng crossed 10 meters instantly and appeared before Jian Wushuang. He swung his thick broadsword ferociously. A water drop essence erupted. All of a sudden Jian Wushuang felt like he had been plunged into a boundless sea, with crashing waves. He was a lonely boat in the sea, at risk of capsizing anytime. Water drop essence. Jian Wushuang frowned, immediately berated in a low voice, I'll break it down. A strong sword light pierced out at an alarming rate, tearing down everything with its speed. The thick broadsword brought stacked waves, covering everything. The sword light pierced several ripples by Jian Wushuang. The power was weakened to the extreme, but the thick broadsword continued to deliver its full force. Retreat. Jian Wushuang retreated without any delay, exerting the sword essence of earth at the same time. The best skill of sword essence of earth, thick and strong, was defense. Hua 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 hua. Lin Feng's broadsword domain erupted completely. A series of shadows split endlessly, and it did not stop. Jian Wushuang felt lost as if he had plunged into a huge whirlpool. No matter how he struggled to resist, he could not get rid of it. He only relied on sword essence of earth to resist. Water drop essence, this is water drop essence. Jian Wushuang with a trace of horror. This was the first time he had fought with such a strong concentrated drip realm. He had a new appreciation towards this water drop essence. Water, the greatest power of water, despite it being seemingly weak and feeble, but it had the power to wear through boulders. After all, it is a lack of sword tactics of sword essence of earth. Otherwise, I can fight with Lin Feng. Jian Wushuang sighed. His heart was yearning for formless sword wave. The swordsman is suppressed, he is finally suppressed. He will be defeated. It is normal. Lin Feng, after all, has passed the 5th level. The disciples of Dragon Palace around he saw the scene on the battlefield, and all of them sighed. But at this moment, a sword shadow pierced out in a straight line, at incredible speed. It was the 3rd type of formless swordsmanship expeditious maneuver. Logically, the 3rd type of formless swordsmanship was not a threat to Lin Feng, but once the sword shadow appeared, boom! It was an extremely forceful sword, its power unexpectedly soaring at this moment, almost directly defeating Lin Feng's offensive. The sharp sword shadow was more than a stroke crossing his shoulder. What? Still in shock, Lin Feng's clothes at his shoulder had been cut away. Jian Wushuang had still won this fight. What's the matter? Lost? How did he lose? This. Everyone around was confused. Lin Feng was so superior, completely suppressing Jian Wushuang. And he should have won immediately, but yet he had suddenly lost. Only Lin Feng, himself, barely knew the reasons for his loss. Strength, it's strength. His power surged suddenly on that sword so that the power of his swordsmanship also rose sharply, tearing through everything directly. Lin Feng thought inwardly. But he was curious that Jian Wushuang was at spiritual sea realm, like him. Why was his power so much stronger than his? He did not know that compared to ordinary martial warrior, the biggest advantage of Jian Wushuang was not his sword essence, nor swordsmanship, but cultivation method. He practiced the heavenly creation skill. He was an inverse cultivator who defied the natural order. Lin Feng's power was at the peak of ordinary spiritual sea realm, and Jian Wushuang, at the peak of his spiritual outbreak, could compare to gold core. The spiritual power of gold core was far from spiritual sea realm. In the Dragon Palace, although there were numerous disciples, most of them were just as the spiritual sea realm. Only a handful of people could break through to reach gold core. All men defeated by Jian Wushuang were just at the spiritual sea realm, and he deliberately controlled his power to fight with them. However, Jian Wushuang had only broken out 30% power while facing Lin Feng. Although it had only been 30%, it was also stronger than the normal spiritual sea realm peak. So he defeated Lin Feng with one sword strike. Lin Feng defeated. Jian Wushuang got 1000 points again. Who else wants to fight with me? Jian Wushuang looked around, but those disciples of the Dragon Palace were now hesitant. Before, everyone treated Jian Wushuang as a soft persimmon, and wanted to pinch and get points from him, but after these 4 showdowns, especially the fight with Lin Feng, they still did not know why Lin Feng failed in the end. They also realized that Jian Wushuang had hidden his real strength before, so now no one was willing to duel him. Watching this scene, Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes, but immediately laughed. Among disciples of the Dragon Palace, there are innumerable geniuses, so many people. Why is it so difficult to find someone to duel with me? Or are you reluctant to fight with me as I am just a newcomer? Well, among you, as long as you went through the 5th level, you can challenge me. I will not reject anyone. As for the bets, all will be 1000 points. Do not reject anyone. Disciples of Dragon Palace around he turned to a dark face. This swordsman, what a crazy guy. He even dares to say that he would not reject anyone, clearly looking down on the disciples who broke through the 5th level. I'll fight with you. Most of disciples of the Dragon Palace were infuriated by Jian Wushuang. A disciple who had broken through the 5th level came to fight with Jian Wushuang immediately.